When last we left Odysseus, at the end of chapter 2, he was heading back to Ithaca to reunite with his family. They had rescued Helen from the Trojans, and everybody was headed back home. This is chapter 3. And here's our new vocabulary words. Listen for some homophones. Ship's bow, front of a boat or vessel. Hurl, throw with great force. Valiant, act with valor and bravery. Rage, with great anger. Famished, very hungry. Whip, move back and forth rapidly. Or long pole with blade at the end. Frantic, wild with fear. Invade, go into enemy's land. Battered, beaten and damaged. Wine dark, see at sunrise or sunset. Tattered, torn to pieces. Flail, swing around wildly. And row, to move a boat with oars. And here's our vocabulary, page 2. Sweep, move swiftly and smoothly. Alas is an expression of sorrow or sadness. Provisions, food and supplies. Cove, a small harbor or bay. Weary, very tired from working. Brambles are thorny bushes. Lurk, wait in hiding. Spring, water rising up out of the ground. Gale, powerful wind as in storms. Lotus, a flower that is a drug. Leafy, has many leaves. Tarry, to be tardy or late to return. Herd, make move like herd of cattle. Anxious, worry and uneasy. And a fleet is a group of ships. And here's a perfect example of homophones. The word is herd. It can be spelled H-E-R-D, as in a herd or group of goats, or it can be spelled H-E-A-R-D, which means you hear something with your ears, like I heard the goats bleat. And now let's look at some homographs. Now a homograph is a word that's spelled the same, but it sounds different, okay? As in the wind blows, or wind up toys. See how wind and wind are spelled the same, but they have very different meanings and they're pronounced differently. Also, a ship's bow or a bow and arrow. Bow and bow are both spelled the same, but they are pronounced differently and they have different meanings. Chapter 3, the Odyssey begins. Soon after the Greek ships left Troy, the skies began to blacken. Lightning zigzagged above the foaming sea. Thunder shook the heaven. Mighty winds stirred the water. The waves grew higher and higher until they were rolling over the bows of the ships. Now, if you'll notice, there's a metaphor in this page, or on this page. Thunder shook the heaven. That's a metaphor, and it compares two things. The gods are punishing us, the Greek warrior shouted. We shall all drown. As his men frantically fought the storm, Odysseus felt bewildered. Why was Zeus, god of the skies, hurling his thunderbolts at them? Why was Poseidon, lord of the seas, sending great waves over the water? Odysseus turned to his men. What has happened to anger the gods? He shouted. Tell me. Before we left Troy, Greek warriors invaded Athena's temple, said one of the men. They were violent and disrespectful. Odysseus was stunned. The Greeks had offended the goddess who had helped them to victory, and now her anger might drown them all. The wind grew stronger. It whipped the sails of the Greek ships and slashed them to rags. Lift your oars, Odysseus shouted to his men. Row! Row to shore! The Greeks struggled valiantly against the mighty wind and waves. Fighting for their lives, they finally rowed their battered ships to a strange shore. There they found shelter in a rocky cave. The storm raged for 2 more days and nights. Then, on the 3rd day, a fair wind blew. The sun came out, and the wine-dark sea was calm at last. "Now we can continue on our way," Odysseus said to his men. "Athena is no longer angry." In the rosy dawn, he ordered them to raise their tattered sails and set off again for Ithaca. But alas, the wrath of Athena had not been fully spent. Hardly had Odysseus reached the open sea than another gale began to blow. For many days Odysseus and his men fought the wind and waves, refusing to surrender to the storm. Finally, on the 10th day, there was sudden calm. Odysseus ordered his fleet to sail into the cove of a leafy green island. There he hoped to find food and drink for his famished, weary men. The Greeks dropped anchor. Then they dragged themselves ashore. They drank cool fresh water from a spring and collapsed onto the sand. As Odysseus rested, he ordered 3 of his men to explore the island and look for provisions. When the 3 had not returned by late afternoon, Odysseus grew angry. Why do they tarry?" he wondered. Odysseus set out in search of the men. He moved through the brush and brambles, calling their names. He had not gone far when he came upon a group of peaceful islanders. They greeted him with warm, friendly smiles, and they offered him their food, lovely, bright flowers. Odysseus was famished, but just as he was about to eat the flowers, he caught sight of his missing men. The 3 were lying on the ground with dreamy smiles on their faces. Odysseus called each man by name, but none of them answered. They did not even look at him. "What have you done to them?" he asked the islanders. "We have given them our flowers to eat," an islander answered. "This is our greatest gift. The gods would be angry if we did not offer to feed our guests." "What sort of flowers are these?" Odysseus asked. "They come from the lotus tree," the islander said. "They have the magical power of forgetfulness. They make a man forget the past." "Forget his memories of home?" asked Odysseus. "And his memories of his family and friends?" The lotus eaters only smiled. They again offered Odysseus their sweet, lovely flowers, but he roughly brushed them away. He pulled his 3 men to their feet and commanded them all to return to their ships at once. The men began to weep. They begged to be left behind so they could stay on the island and eat lotus flowers forever. Odysseus angrily herded the men back to the ships. As they got near the shore, the 3 tried to escape. Odysseus called for help. "Tie their hands and feet," he shouted to his crew. "Make haste before others eat the magic flowers and forget their homes too." The 3 flailing men were hauled aboard and tied to rowing benches. Then Odysseus ordered the 12 ships to push off from the shore. Once more, the Greeks set sail for Ithaca, sweeping the gray sea with their long oars. As they rowed past dark islands with jagged rocks and shadowy coves, Odysseus felt troubled and anxious. What other strange wonders lurked on these dark, unknown shores? End of chapter 3. I wonder what's going to happen next.